Nyhetsveckan med Ingrid och Maria.
Det är 151 skjutningar på 151 dagar.
Det håller på att gå fullständigt åt helvete på ren svenska.
You look at what's happening last night in Sweden. Sweden! Who would believe this? Sweden!
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this extra pod with me, Ingrid Carlqvist from Sweden, and my fellow Swede, Pelle Neroth Taylor, but who was brought up in England, and he has his own show now, where he speaks to a lot of people every day, and it's called Pulse.today. Welcome, Pelle.
A pleasure to be on your show, Ingrid. I've followed your work for many years. It's a real privilege and enjoy all your work. So, yes, fantastic.
Thank you so much. So let's talk a little bit about the presidential election in the US. I woke up very early that morning, like 5 o'clock, and I jumped out of bed and went to my computer, and I was so happy. And the whole day I was walking around with a big smile on my face, but not so many of my fellow Swedes are happy. Are you happy?
I was very happy. I followed Trump because I have I believe him. I think that he's going to. I think a lot of young men in America believe in him. I think he stands for free speech. I think all the things I care about, peace in Ukraine, a kind of moderate nationalism. I mean, we love America, but an America that doesn't kind of bomb other countries, but shows itself by a positive example. And is fun as well. It's fun, and that optimism spreads. And everything about optimism, everything about Trump so far is a green flag for me. The fact that he's like the modern equivalent to the Sex Pistols. I remember when the Sex Pistols in London in 1978. I don't know if you could swear on your podcast, but I say I won't. But he said, fuck off to the pompous BBC presenter. Remember Johnny Rotten? Yeah, I do. And it was all that. It was Britain was kind of hidebound, and these guys came on the scene, and they just didn't care. And no BS. That's what the people like about Trump. They're fed up with these artificial. I mean, it's one thing about the sort of artificial culture of a television station. It's all theatre in a way, but this constant lying, this constant narratives, and Trump just calls BS. He's like the boy in that in the Emperor with New Clothes. People love that. I love it. He turns out to be quite moderate on free speeches. He's actually a bit of a liberal in many ways. Sees talent, promotes it. He's now got a fantastic team around him. We're really looking to the 21st century, not the 20th century with this talk about war and geopolitics, but putting a man on Mars and fantastic things which Americans are good at. And I love that feeling. And I love that normal Americans on the conservative side, really clever ones, because America has got a conservative intelligentsia, many of whom I've interviewed. They are not worried, and they give very good reasons. And they're not so different. It's just that they are better informed. They're extremely well informed. And to have these children on Swedish television crying out, and they don't understand a damn thing about politics or about America or anything. They're just living in their own little narratives, this little duck pond. That's
why I left. That's why I left the mainstream media, like 12, 13, almost 15 years ago, I think, because the job drastically changed. When I started in journalism, I was only 20 years. That was in the 80s. And my boss could tell me, well, you have to do this job, and you go there and you talk to them, and they will probably say like this, and you write the article. Okay, I said, and I came back and said, you were totally wrong. They said the opposite of what you thought. Well, great. Write that. That was journalism to me, to interview people and search for news, for the truth. But I quickly learned that not so many journalists were really interested in the truth. They were more interested in promoting themselves, having big bylines and so on. And around I left first in around the millennial in 2000, and I started to freelance. So I was not sitting in the newsroom for 10 years or something like that. And then when I went back to Aftonbladet, the biggest newspaper in Sweden, around 2010, everything was changed. The bosses, they decided all the news, even, early in the morning, if no big things happen. And they told the reporters to write this is the headline, this is what you're going to write about, and you call these people. And I saw them, young guys and girls, but they didn't say that. Okay, you phone 10 more people, because you are going to write what I tell you to write. And then I realized this is not for me anymore.
Wow. I mean, I wonder why that is. There's a cultural change. I mean, it's the same in America and Britain, of course. The quality of journalism. When I was writing some books on Cold War history, did a lot of research into the, old archives from the 1980s, and the press seemed much better. It was better. It was written in a less inflammatory way. I mean, when writing about Russia, for instance, Soviet Union, they're quite polite about Russia. They're saying the Soviet Union has its interests, we have ours. Not this endless insults of what's going on. Everything's descended to a kind of kindergarten level, very emotional, very simplistic, and as you said, driven not by facts but by narratives. I don't know why is that?
Well, I'm not sure, but I think that, most mainstream media outlets are owned by the big globalist companies. They own Swedish newspapers. They own, British and American. And I think that their interest, let's call it the deep state, their interest is to bring us into this kind of a fascist society, an Orwell society. So they don't want people to be very well informed. They want people to believe in the narrative, and they punish you if you don't go along. And that is what we normally call brainwashing. And that's what the journalists are doing. And I think there are many in my generation, sitting still in the mainstream media newsrooms and are sick of it, but they have families they have to support, so they can't do anything. But I think that is very cowardly to do like that, because if you really care about journalism and the truth, then you can't lie all day long and lie to your readers, your listeners, or your viewers.
I mean, do you think it's just top down, or is to some extent bottom up? I mean, because I talk about Generation Z. I hate that expression, by the way, because they were mollycoddled at university. This idea that young kids, there are far more of them now, so you don't have the brightest anymore. You have a much more democratic intake, and then they have safe zones and all the rest of it, the safe spaces, and their helicopter parents looked after them, and then they come into journalism, and they have that lack of free thinking. And I'm sorry to say this as a woman, but maybe it's a greater female representation. It creates more conformism, and entitlement also, because these girls, if they're pretty, they've had everything. A world largely created by men, now served up to them, and they kind of despise men, always chasing after their bodies, and then they have this conformist approach. Because it's still the female collective. You don't want to be bullied by the female collective.
I've been a lot of times.
If I can go off on my hobby horse here, I usually impose it on my girlfriend, my long-suffering Swedish girlfriend. But I watched when I came to Sweden, when UK journalism hadn't descended to quite the low level of Swedish journalism. It is there now, but I was struck by how these non-entities, these 25-year-old girls sitting there on the TV sofas, bullying everyone else around them because it's something they learned in high school. It's the high school queen mentality. You can't be with us. You're a leper. And they never talked about any of the issues. And even Denmark, which is Scandinavian, have a much more mature debating culture. So I remember, I'll never forget it. You had a group of Danish journalists and a group of Swedish journalists, and the Danes were kind of looking at the Swedes just like that, because they were so childish, the Swedes, and they couldn't have a debate. And it really is like 13 or 14-year-olds when you there's a point in your school education where if you try to ask a teacher an intelligent question, all the girls sitting in the front, they turn around, they look at you like that. It's that thing, right?
I think you're right. I think it's not only top bottom, it's also bottom up, because many journalists, even when I started, thought that they were a little bit better than the readers. So we could know things, like most people who rob old people are from a certain group. We journalists, we could handle that information, but we couldn't write about it because then people would go ballistic and they would be racist, all those stupid things. So I think there has been this von oben mentality from journalists to their readers, and that's been, it's become more and more of that because they don't even meet normal people anymore. They just, we call it in Sweden the klig, the sticky stuff between journalists and politicians and celebrities. We see that all over the Western world. So I think that the Swedish journalists that are sitting on TV, they were almost crying when they talked about President, the new president is Donald Trump. Oh my God, oh my God. I think that many of them, they actually believe that he is horrible. They have convinced themselves of that he is Hitler, and they don't understand why Americans could vote for him because he is Hitler.
Well, I mean, there's a poll, a diagram circulating of the support for Trump in European countries, and Russia is the most, and then Sweden is the least, and
wasn't Denmark worse? I think I saw Denmark was number
unfortunately,
one.
Denmark's become as woke as Sweden. Denmark, Sweden, and Finland, and I thought that doesn't say that you're the good guys. It shows that you're the biggest idiots in the world. You Scandinavians, you are the biggest schmucks, the most propagandized schmucks on the entire planet. Honestly. Because you don't, and it's it's a terrible indictment. It's nothing to be proud of, honestly. And I think you're right. I think what's happened is that I mean, journalism used to be a kind of a working class profession. It was a trade, basically. In Britain, you did go to university, and you looked down to people who went to university. You went through the local newspapers, you talked to a lot of normal people, and then you finally ascended to the Times or whatever. Now people go straight from journalism school, which didn't exist in the UK before. You're trained into certain values, and then you go straight to the Times. And so it's lost that working class. It's lost its male. It's got that anti-bullshit filter that journalists used to have, and now now it's professional, and you don't want to hold the leaders to account. You're with the leaders, looking down at people and telling them what to think, basically. So it's as you say, top down rather than bottom up. It was not the sort of rebellious guy sitting in the pub all day and then going attacking his leaders, but people drinking Perrier and then looking down on normal people.
Yeah, and that's why. But I'm quite disappointed because the Swedes have woken up the last couple of years since we had the new government. More and more people are waking up. We have a government that actually talks about how Sweden could have as few immigrants as possible, even talking about sending people back home, which was totally unthinkable 2 years ago. So I thought that more and more Swedes had understood that you can't watch the mainstream media because then you go stupid. But even though they have seen, they lied about COVID, they lied about immigration is the best thing, diversity is Australia. Even though they found out all these lies, they still believe the mainstream media when they say that Trump is Hitler.
That's funny. That's so funny because exactly as you said, it's the SD types with the socials. They've been demonized. They know themselves they've been lied about, just as they lie about Trump. So if you're a working class Swedish guy and they know they lie about his type, why can't they work out they might be lying about other things? And as you said, COVID and all the rest of it, and lying about immigration, but they don't make that connection. It's very strange.
Yeah, it's strange. And I remember when I was young, when I started in journalism, Ronald Reagan was the president of the US. And I thought that he was the worst kind of president you could imagine. And then later on, I've discovered that he was actually a very, very good president and very popular. So why did I think that? Because I was manipulated too by the mainstream media. So, I mean, I think that we have been in this matrix for a very long time, and it's difficult for people. I find, almost always right.
Mm.
But when I'm wrong, I say, thank you. Oh my God. Oh, wow. I was wrong. That's fantastic. But most people don't like to admit that they were wrong. And that's why many are still clinging on to this. The mainstream media must be truthful, because otherwise I've been wrong all my life.
I think that the need for religious certainty that people have has transferred itself into journalism. I mean, journalists are the new priests. That's not an uncommon thing to say. And it's my mother, for instance, who lives in Malmo. She listens to the Swedish radio 12 hours a day, and it's her friend. She lives alone, and it's very difficult for her psychologically to believe. It's like, and of course, in Sweden was a very religious country back in the 19th century. When I was researching the Swedish church and its power over people's minds, and British and American preachers came to spread the free church word, and they're surprised by how intellectually authoritarian Sweden was, and they blamed it on the church. And today, I can't stand listening to Swedish radio with these pompous voices, in their Stockholm accents, and and it slows down, and I don't buy it because I'm an outsider, But if you're brought into and Swedes have always believed their authorities as a strength and a weakness, because it creates a high level of trust and a low distance, I don't know, between ruler and ruled or whatever. But it's very refreshing to talk to Americans. I hadn't really had contact with Americans before. Most of my journalistic career was in Europe, and I had a bad experience when I went to America in my teens. I thought, I don't want to go to this country because they're so ignorant. But I met the top Americans, basically, and they're much brighter than their European. They're so switched on, and they're so professional. They don't have that emotional thing as if you disagree with them, you're the wrong kind of guy. They're totally okay with that,
Yeah.
And they're also, they really believe in the First Amendment. They cited it several times. They talk about how many Swedes can mention that Sweden has the oldest press freedom laws in the world, but Swedes don't go around talking about it. It doesn't have that. These are my rights. I'm an American. I can say what I want. That's what the Americans think, and they're so clever about it. Not they're all rational about their debates, and if you disagree with them, that's fine. And then they know all their arguments, and it's been a pleasure to do so. And you can see they're the ones who escaped Europe. They're the ones who want to. You needed tell me if you needed permission from your local priest in Sweden if you're going to leave your parish, your socken, and go to America. So I think what's that guy, that Swedish writer, Vilhelm Moberg. He has one character who's kind of laughing, and the priest is looking down at him. Why are you laughing? Because I don't need to suck up to you anymore. Yeah,
but the problem is that when the Social Democrats, they've ruled Sweden for most of a century, and they hated the church. They hated Christianity. So they had, from the beginning, they had a plan to take Christianity away from the Swedish people, and they have succeeded. I mean, in all the polls, we are the country that are least religious. We don't believe in God, but I think that is only. I don't think that's true, because Swedes, they go to this new age stuff, and they are searching, and they go into nature. There was one religion a professor who wrote a book about Granskogsfolket. How would you say that in English?
Fir tree people.
Fir tree people, yeah. Swedes are fir tree people. They go out in the wood, in the nature, and that is their religion. And I'm writing a book now about my awakening 5 years ago. I met Jesus on the Sea of Galilee, and I think that what the Swedes are looking for in nature is God. It's God's nature. That's why the Swedes go up, but they can't say, I'm a Christian, because then you are a little bit corny. I mean, only stupid people believe in that. So that's why I'm writing this book now, and God told me what to call it. And in English, it would be, oh my God, are you for real?
Right, okay. Well, I'm quite pro Christianity, so good for you. I think the need for religion is absolutely constant in mankind, and I think that it's evolutionarily so, because then you'll have children, because there's another life, because having children is a big investment of your time. But if you know that you don't have to realize yourself in this life and there's another life, then you can have children, and by definition, only those people who have children pass on their genes, right? So actually, to be a childless sort of purple-haired anti-Trumper feminist is evolutionary a dead end, you know, because they won't have children, and that's out of the gene pool, you know.
So let's go back to Trump. You said you're very optimistic, and so am I. What do you think is the most important thing that Trump could do and hopefully will do? Is it to crush the deep state?
Yeah, I think I'm national security and intelligence issues matter more to me than almost anything else. And I've followed, and maybe you'll talk about who killed Olof Palmer, for instance, you know, or Dag Hammarskjöld, which I've also been researching and writing about. So maybe the Swedes should get in there. And I think I just saw he hasn't talked about it since the election, but he made a speech in September where he listed about 10 things he was going to do, and it's almost like no anti-war liberal could hope for more. I mean, you know, this is not Hitler, right? This is a guy who's going to declassify everything. I don't know if I've got time to read it out, but he's going to declassify lots of stuff. He's going to make it illegal for intelligence officers to leak to the media and pretend to be whistleblowers. Because you know what happened during the Russiagate thing is, several whistleblowers that we talked to think that Trump is a Russian spy. Well, those whistleblowers are just CIA agents who have an axe to grind, you know. And he's going to make a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a reform of the FISA courts, restoring presidential authority. Trump intends to issue an executive order which will restore the president's authority to remove federal employees, thereby allowing for the aggressive management and dismissal of federal workers. He's going to overhaul national security and intelligence, including removing individuals from national security and intelligence agencies who've engaged in corrupt practices. He's going to crack down his independence of the inspectors generals, ensure that inspector generals' offices are physically separate from the departments they oversee, an independent auditing system, geographical redistribution of the bureaucracy so not everything is in the stinking swamp that is Washington, ban on post-government employment, prohibiting federal bureaucrats from taking positions at companies they previously regulated. So that's going to kill off the corrupt pharmaceutical merry-go-round, you know. So, I mean, what's not to like there? You know, it's all fantastic stuff. That's why RFK has gone to join him. So it's what we're going to see. Tell me if I'm going on too much. I followed very closely the last time the CIA were roasted was in the Church Committee in 1975, 76 after the Vietnam War. And after Watergate, actually, there was Nixon's last thing to do. And that, you know, it's from the Church Committee that we learned that the CIA poisons people, carries out coups, carries out assassinations, controls the media, experimented with LSD and all the rest of it. But it was a limited hangout. Not everything came out. But that's why you have so many clever intelligence writers in the United States, historians talking about the CIA. It's almost everyone knows that the CIA does this. The Russians do it too, of course. But anyway, we're part of the West, so we should be interested in what our own side does. Can you ever imagine anyone doing some same thing for the Swedish intelligence? Absolutely not. British MI6 is totally embedded in the British media, but nobody dares talk about it. So the Americans are much more open about it. Anyway, I'm hoping for something similar. He's going to get at all the FBI. I mean, I think the FBI tried to kill him twice, for God's sake, you know? So it's outrageous. I mean, you know, and that was totally memory hole. They stole the last election, and he said he's going to look into that. And the guests on my shows give very, very reasoned and good arguments for why all this happened. The books have been published. It's just that you never hear about them in the little Swedish duck pond. You think that he's a conspiracy theorist, but there's actually evidence for all of these things. I mean, you can make a good argument, give pushback, but you know, the fact that Trump won all the bellwether counties in 2020, which all presidents have won, but he lost still, you know, and the Biden got 81 million votes, which no one had, that there were so many down seats, so many votes where there was only a vote for Biden but not down ticket, which means that they only put a cross for Biden but not the senators, which is very unusual. All those things, which if it was a company, it would have failed that audit. It was a clear case of fraud. So I think that, and the other thing I want to say, actually, it reminds me before I forget, is one guest I had on last week who's a data scientist and he's going to be called up before the Trump Commission. He says that, you know, you think they electronically manipulate elections in the States? No, we do it worldwide. And if you had a Swedish journalist worth his salt, they'd say, did you steal Swedish elections? Because I remember back in 2018, everyone was thought that the SD were going to get...
The Sweden Democrats, let's just say the Sweden Democrats.
Sweden Democrats, the so-called far-right party, the party that threatened the status quo, got 25%. At some point in the evening, I can't remember if you remember, then the system went down, and then they were down to 17%. And that's exactly reminiscent of what happened in Wisconsin with the drop and roll in 2020. When suddenly there's a spike in Biden's votes. So, but the American journalists, they have the balls to investigate these things, even in 2020. Not a single stupid Swedish mainstream journalist has even bothered to inquire about this.
No, not at all, not at all. They are so
they're so
in this
tame.
clegg, you know, the
Yeah,
sticky
right.
stuff.
They need to pay their pensions. Anyway, I mean, that's a great, because that's a great story, you know. And if Trump's going to get to the bottom of that and has said, you could criticize Russia and China, all those things you could say, that all the enemies in Europe of Russia and China, everything they could say is true, but we've got to realize it happens on our side as well. And before we can meet them toe to toe, we've got to admit that, I mean, let's say the Russians assassinate people. Yeah, but we also assassinate people. So you don't sit on your bloody high horse.
And what do you think? He said so many times that he will end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. And all the Swedish journalists, I listened to them yesterday. I was out in my car. So that's the only time I listened to Swedish radio. But they were talking to, you know, Jan Eliasson, who used to be the UN vice president, and some other guy. And they were actually, they didn't say it right out, but it was like this. Oh my God, is it going to end the war? Oh, will there be peace? I mean, it's so stupid. Why wouldn't you want peace? It's so bloody stupid.
I mean, the thing about the territories that Russia's got, you talk in unprovoked, it wasn't unprovoked because the MI6 were poking the bear for 10 years, you know,
yeah.
And the invasion of Ukraine, it was invasion unprovoked of our territory. Well, I mean, Ukraine is a divided country. It's as divided as Canada or Belgium. The West hates the East. The West Ukrainians, the Galicians, hate the Russians, and they are. I mean, they're really racist. I've been to Ukraine towards the people in Eastern Ukraine who are basically ethnically and linguistically Russian. If you did a poll back in 2010, before the whole thing started, by a Ukrainian Opinion Institute, 70% of all Ukrainians, actually, so that includes the West, wanted a border-free relationship with Russia, just like Norway has with Sweden. Get that. 20%, probably all of those in the Donbass, actually wanted to join Russia. This was the Kiev Institute for Sociology. And then another 10% wanted to distance themselves. So before the whole thing started, before the elite in Ukraine were co-opted by the West, by the attractions of London and Paris or whatever, you know, everyone loves that. They were quite pro-Russian, you know, they said that it was family and Russia was growing richer. And when Putin invaded, the areas he's got now, basically the areas are always pro-Russian and ethnic, always voted for the pro-Russian candidate in elections. It was a very divided country. So you can't say, it's like, it should have been like Czechoslovakia, where the Czechs and the Slovaks were close, but they decided to divorce. That's what should have happened with Ukraine after the Minsk Accords failed. Yeah. West Ukraine and then East Ukraine. And then and we wouldn't have had this war. It's an unnecessary war.
Yeah, so of course.
I think we're going to have that divide now. We're going to have East Ukraine belongs to Russia. I think Putin didn't want to have he wanted to join NATO. People say it was an MI6 asset.
Why didn't the NATO disappear when the Warsaw Pact disappeared?
Yeah, right.
When the Soviet Union collapsed, why did we need NATO? And why did Sweden join NATO after all these years? I think NATO might not be here so much longer.
Yeah. I mean, I've you know, I mean, I've been down to South Africa 2 times. I wrote an ebook in English about Olof Palme. So when I came back to Sweden, I thought, I spent some years in Sweden in my childhood. I thought, what was big then? Oh, Olof Palme, I remember him. So I wanted to follow that up because I remember the very anti-Palme climate of the time. All my research, and people I've spoken to in South Africa and in Sweden and the UK, I think it was the Brits who gave the orders and the South Africans that did it. But by killing Palme, that was the beginning of the end of Sweden's geopolitical independence, because you might dislike Palme, and there's a lot I really hated about him, and I guess you perhaps did too. But he was an independent pole of power for the Swedes, a profile between East and West, very popular in the global South, you know. And a lot of people were proud to be Swedes. And then that couldn't be acceptable, because if you were Anglo, and the fact that he was getting close to Gorbachev and the Germans, the German-Sweden-Russia axis that was taking shape in 1985, that was unacceptable. to the Anglo powers. So like just looking at geopolitically, that the fact that Sweden was so successful in talking to, because Gorbachev in 1985 wanted to turn his country into Sweden, basically. The Soviets loved Sweden, you know, because it was what their country could have been in another world. They could never be like the Anglos or the French, but there's some affinity there that a lot of Swedes colonized Russia. And so I think that was unacceptable. But after that, you had Carlqvist, who made it his life mission. He was a CIA asset, I've been told by some senior diplomat and several others. He basically spent his life's mission turning Sweden into a NATO protectorate, and that's happened, you know. So, and then I think you've got young people, young men, you know, lots of hormones. They don't know anything, and they like flying planes close to the Russians and playing games and stuff like that. And unfortunately, that seems to be the current government. You know, they're quite young and sort of male, a bit macho.
Oh yeah, they're all into this.
So they're into this.
But there are some good things about it. That finally we are, you know, getting back some sort of defense in Sweden, which haven't had for many years. I think I have a lot of sources in intelligence, and they keep telling me that it's no big deal that Sweden went into NATO because we've been in there for 50 years, but now at least we can stop lying about it. So I don't think the difference is very big.
I don't know. I think the civilian side, I think the secret alliance, I'm not sure. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this because I think that it was in the if the NATO deep state in Sweden, if it would stay behind or whatever, were part of the assassination of Palmer, it was in their interest to say that we were a NATO country anyway, and that Palmer was a traitor rather than that Palmer actually represented the will of the people. I'm not sure. I'll take a pass on that because I think the Social Democrats thought that they were neutral, you know. And then that there was I think what I've been told, I might as well say it now, is that those Russian submarine intrusions in the 1980s, mostly American and British, what would have happened in the twilight to war? They would have taken out Palmer and kidnapped him or killed him or something. And that would have been a casus belli or a reason to, because NATO couldn't afford not to have Sweden on board. No. So what happened? So, because Sweden was the unsinkable aircraft carrier. And if the Russians invaded Germany, they would take out all the American air bases in Germany in day 3 or something. So, but using all the Swedish air bases, and near where I live, all the roads are straight because they're air base. So they were going to turn Sweden into a NATO airbase, and you couldn't afford to do that if the political side were not on board. So he's going to be presented with an ultimatum, and if he said no, he's going to be taken out, and it would be Spetsnaz kills Palmer. Oh, let's go to war with Russia. It was SAS pretending to be Spetsnaz, or even maybe Swedish special forces pretending to be Russian special forces. I think that's what would have happened.
Yeah. You could be right. Yeah. So, shall we wrap this up? Or any things that you wanted to say that you didn't have the opportunity to? Please.
I think that America, I'm pro-American, and I think, but I'm not pro-American empire, not pro the globalist empire. I think Americans like it. They want to be liked as well. And now they've really hit the ball out of the park because they provided a model for us all to be. You can be optimistic and patriotic. You can be, it spreads positivity all around the world. And a lot of people are fed up with our globalist, incompetent, transgender, obsessed, stupid elites, you know. Yeah. But there are no elections coming up for a couple of years, but we're seeing movement in France and Germany, and the Germans have their election next year. So maybe that'll provide additional impetus for the Swedes to change.
And hopefully Piers Morgan is right. I saw him on the Megyn Kelly show just a couple of hours ago, and he said the woke mind virus is now officially dead. I don't think that is true. I think we see all these crazy American women and men, boys, crying and screaming, and they are actually going through a mental crisis. A lot of them, but I do think that the woke mind virus is dying. It's not dead, but it's dying, and I hope that someone can help these people because they are scared to death.
Well, I think I think when I first came to Sweden, it was totally politically correct, but now I watch the SVT, a Swedish television humor program on Friday evenings, which makes fun of woke a little bit, and. You know, so the Swedish humor television moves slightly ahead of official public opinion. So it shows that you can make fun of things you'd never dare to do a couple of years ago. But I think, unfortunately, in the UK, which is my home country, they just elected a woke government, as it were. Yeah. And the British Trump movement was totally neutralized by turning Farage into Kremlin stooge. But Britain is very, very globalist. I think Britain will be the last to change. And Sweden is so closely allied to Britain. So we'll see, The funny thing is these people think that they're the liberal the bulwark of freedom. They didn't realize that they're their problem. They think they're the solution,
Yeah.
The Scandinavians and the Brits. Yeah.
I feel really sorry for all the British people because they are in a very, very bad situation. I mean, we in Sweden, we are lucky compared to them because the Keir Starmer government...
Economic disaster. It's a country. Yeah. I mean, I have people... It's difficult. You can't... People... A house costs twice a salary, average salary back in 1987. Parents' generation, much better off than today's kids' generation. Yeah. Much better off. Today, it's 10 or 20 times the average salary. So you're living on renting. You can't get a family. You can't start a family. You engage in sort of woke politics as your substitute for having a real life, or you complain. And Britain is in a terrible, terrible state.
Yeah.
And it can't reshore. I think America can reshore its economy and grow and give back the working class their jobs, but Britain can't do that. It's so enmeshed. Britain is the globalist country par excellence because of its free trade policies, and Sweden is slightly better off. Yeah.
I used to love England. I went to London every year, and I've been there many, many times. I have some decent family in England too. And I really, the last time I was in London, I was no way. I'm never going back here. Why? You don't see any British people. You just see Muslims all over.
And do you think the British cultural and intellectual climate has changed?
Yeah, but there is something that Britain has that Sweden doesn't really have. It's the anger from the working class, and I think that's why they needed to put Tommy Robinson in jail again, because he doesn't tell people to go out and fight. He tells them to be calm, but any day he could change his mind, and then he could start a revolution in Britain.
I think there's a huge amount of anger in Britain. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in the 1980s, Swedes would go to London, so it's so much more free in the UK than our safe little boring social democratic state. But I don't think the feeling Swedes and anyway, social democrats would go and say that privately. Oh, we enjoy the pubs and the intellectual freedom that the Brits have, the sense of humor and the ability to talk about anything. I don't think the Swedes go there and feel that anymore. Maybe they do.
No, I don't think so. I never hear anyone going to London or to England for that matter. Okay, Pelle, thank you so much. And please tell us again, where can we find your show?
Yeah, it's the Pulse today, and I do a daily show between 1 and 2 o'clock, and it's mostly US politics. I get the American early birds, and I cover it from a European perspective, and because I also know Sweden, I don't know. I think I'm very well informed about US politics and European and Scandinavian politics, so I can blend the two. I can explain it US politics to Scandinavian European audience and vice versa. I can be an ambassador for Sweden, although I'm not much of one, to be honest. Not a very enthusiastic one anyway. Not a willing one anyway.
I can be that enthusiastic one.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Pelle. Hope to see you again soon.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Nyhetsveckan med Ingrid och Maria.
Det är 151 skjutningar på 151 dagar.
Det håller på att gå fullständigt åt helvete på ren svenska.
You look at what's happening